Welcome to The Critique. Today we're looking at a spoken word analysis that explores a really fascinating premise. A possible drop in online anti-Semitism may be driven by state actors like China and Iran changing strategy. Let's get right into the first point, which is about establishing the piece's core premise. The material identifies a compelling correlation between geopolitical shifts and social media sentiment, but the causal link needs stronger evidentiary glue to move beyond anecdotal observation.
That is exactly where I found myself pausing. The premise is, it's fascinating, this idea that we're seeing a vibe shift on a platform like X.
Right.
But as I went through it, I just noticed this heavy reliance on phrases like, people are starting to notice, or trajectory in the algorithm. And then there's the anecdote about a non-Jewish friend.
The vibes.
Exactly. The vibes. It paints a picture, definitely, but is there a risk that it asks the listener to take a little too much on faith? We're told the enthusiasm for this stuff is losing steam, but the bridge between that feeling and the hard data feels a bit, well, you can't see it.
I see what you're saying. And look, the author cites an I-24 report about China scaling back bots, which is a great solid piece of evidence.
It is.
But the connection between Beijing's high-level policy change and the specific exposure of anti-Israel narratives on X feels, a little loose in the current draft.
It's presented as, China stopped the bots, therefore my feed is better.
And I wonder, have we really considered how that mechanism actually works? That's the missing piece for me. If I'm in the target audience, an expert listener, I want to know the mechanics.
Yes. How does a policy decision in Beijing translate to a specific drop in engagement for some hostile post? Right now, it feels a little bit like magic.
Exactly. So the suggestion here is to bridge that gap. Connect the I2 report and Melissa Chen's theory about Iran and Venezuela with the actual user experience on the platform. Give it more concrete reasoning.
Okay.
So instead of just saying, science seems to be shifting, we need to explain how removing those bots specifically impacts the visibility of the figures mentioned, like, say, a Candace Owens or a Tucker Carlson.
Building on that, what if we looked at it from the perspective of the artificial nature of the engagement? There's that great quote from Haviv Redichgor in the text.
Oh, yeah.
He mentions the unbelievable power that foreign influence ops have had. That's a golden opportunity that's just kind of sitting there right now.
It is. And here's a concrete way to use it. The script could explicitly connect Gore's point to the mechanism of the decline. You could argue something like, when state-funded bot farms stop artificially inflating engagement numbers, organic pushback finally becomes visible.
That is so much stronger. It takes the vibe and grounds it in a mechanical reality.
It explains why the user is seeing a change.
Right. It's not just that the haters went away. It's that their amplifiers were unplugged.
And another concrete example would be to rework the reference to Melissa Chen. Right now, it just quotes her saying Venezuela and Iran are weakening, which is good context, but let's sharpen it.
How so?
You could say, because these state actors are pulling back resources, the echo chamber that sustained these narratives is collapsing, leaving the domestic influencers shouting into a void.
Oh, that's fascinating. That turns a geopolitical observation into a media analysis. And I wonder, could the author contrast the pre-shift environment with a specific recent example?
Go on. Well, the text mentions that praise for Hitler and Holocaust denial were trending. Could we introduce a specific recent instance where a similar narrative actually failed to trend?
That would be excellent proof of concept. Proving the bot withdrawal theory by showing a failed viral attempt is just much more persuasive than saying, my friend noticed it too.
It moves the argument from observation to forensic analysis.
Here's a post that would have gotten 50,000 likes 6 months ago, and today it's sitting at 200. That sells the point. And it respects the audience's intelligence. They know the platform, show them the gears turning, or in this case, stopping. It moves the piece from, I feel like things are getting better, to here is evidence the engine was turned off.
Precisely. And that mechanical explanation is so crucial because it sets up the stakes for everything else. If the audience gets that this is an engineered thing, they're ready for the more complex arguments to come.
Which brings us to the next section.
Yes. Because the argument takes a pretty significant shift in the second half. The transition from discussing Chinese and Iranian bot farms to analyzing the internal dynamics of the U.S. Republican Party creates a tonal whiplash that risks alienating the audience or diluting the core thesis.
Yeah, this was a moment where I felt the narrative tension just snap a little. We start with this high-level geopolitical intrigue, Beijing, Tehran, Caracas, and then all of a sudden, we are deep in the weeds of Trump versus Vance versus the Candace crowd.
It makes sense in a vacuum, but the framing.
Exactly. Right now, the connection hinges on a quote from Trump about his Jewish family members. And it feels like a totally separate political commentary, just sort of grafted onto a tech analysis.
It does. It pivots from foreign manipulation to who has moral clarity in the GOP, which is relevant, but it feels like a lane change without a signal.
So what's the suggestion?
The suggestion is to frame that entire domestic political section strictly through the lens of the information war that was established right at the top.
I like that. So the goal is to make sure the discussion of Trump and Vance doesn't feel like some partisan detour, but more like a case study.
Precisely. A case study of who is and isn't susceptible to the very foreign influence we just mentioned. It keeps the bot farm thesis as the spine of the whole piece.
Okay.
The listeners shouldn't feel like they've switched channels to a political talk show. They should feel like they're applying the bot theory to a real-world scenario.
So, for example, instead of just asking, do you condemn those views, which is how the text introduces the Trump segment now,
You'd frame Trump's rejection of anti-Semitism as a rejection of the artificial narratives being pushed by China and Qatar.
yes, that ties it right back to the core theme.
And when the script criticizes J.D. Vance for pandering to the griper, we should explicitly link this to that earlier point about signal not being entirely organic.
Oh, that's sharp. So the argument becomes Vance is reacting to a fake reality created by bots, whereas Trump, in this specific case, is ignoring the noise.
Exactly. That transforms a political critique into an analytical one. It's not just Vance is wrong, it's Vance is falling for the trick we just described.
It makes the host an analyst of influence, not just a commentator on politics. Much more sophisticated.
It really tightens the whole narrative.
I do wonder about the length of the Trump quote, though. It's pretty detailed. Beautiful 3 grandchildren, least anti-Semitic person. Is there a risk that the verbatim quote distracts from the sharper point?
I think so. It's great for color, but for this specific argument, it might be too much fluff. The concrete suggestion would be to trim the quote to just the essentials of his rejection.
And focus more on Haviv Reddick Gur's interpretation of it, the indictment of this moment on the American right.
Because that indictment is that the right is being manipulated by these foreign actors, right?
Correct.
If you frame it that way, the domestic politics section becomes essential proof of the whole foreign influence thesis, not a distraction. It shows the real-world consequences of the bot farms from minute one.
It answers the question, why does it matter if China uses bots?
Exactly. It matters because domestic leaders start making bad decisions based on fake data.
That is a very powerful thread. It keeps the listener locked into the information war concept. Now that brings us to the end of the piece, which it takes quite a turn.
It does. The promotional pivot to the Qatar documentary at the end undermines the optimistic thesis of the opening by introducing a sudden, heavy, sophisticated horror without sufficient narrative bridging.
It really is a mood shift, isn't it? We spend the whole time hearing about how we are winning and the algorithm is clearing up, and then suddenly, wham! Qatar is a gleaming nation running a con in modern geopolitics, and we get this symphony of savagery.
It creates a cognitive dissonance. The transition in the text is just one of the key problematic actors is Qatar. It feels functional, almost like checking a box, but it's jarring.
Yeah.
It shifts from the tide is turning in our favor to a tiny state is fooling the West, way too abrupt. Is the connection between China's decline and Qatar's influence fully established there?
I don't think so. That feels like an area to bolster.
That's exactly the suggestion. Weave the Qatar threat throughout the narrative as the counterweight to the China decline. This creates a dynamic tension.
So it's not a surprise at the end.
Right, China is pulling back, but Qatar is still pushing forward.
I see. So instead of saving Qatar for the end as a plug, you introduce them as the remaining antagonist earlier on. It's almost like a hydra. You cut off the China head, but the Qatar head is still biting.
Yes, for example, when you bring up the I-24 report about China pivoting, you could immediately add a clause like, but while Beijing pivots, Doha is still bankrolling the arsonists.
That sets up the stakes perfectly. It means the victory isn't total. It's just the shift on one front. It prepares the listener for the bad news to come.
It stops the documentary promo from feeling like a bait and switch, and it makes the plug feel like the necessary solution to the remaining problem, not just an ad tacked on at the end.
It becomes organic. We solve China, now we need to solve Qatar, and here is the tool to do it.
Exactly.
I really like the imagery used in the promo script, the symphony of savagery. It's horrific, but it's powerful. Could we use that earlier to contrast with the bots?
That's a great concrete example. You could frame it like this. Bots are artificial, just code on a screen. But the consequences of the hate they stoked are real.
like the luxury villas in Doha protecting Hamas leaders.
That connects the digital world of the first half with the physical reality of the documentary. It grounds the digital argument, reminds the audience that online hate doesn't stay online.
And what about the call to action itself? The text says, if you don't know about them, you should watch. It's a bit passive.
We could say something like, we've identified the void left by China, but here is the actor filling that void.
Precisely. That leads naturally into the documentary. It frames it as the next level of understanding the listener needs. It turns the promo into content. It makes watching an intellectual imperative, not just a favor.
That flows much better. But this all leads me to a question about the overall takeaway for the listener, because we have these conflicting signals. Optimism on bots, pessimism on Qatar.
Right. So, a key theme here is clarity of purpose. The piece offers multiple conflicting conclusions about the durability of this shit, and it leaves the listener unsure whether to feel relieved or vigilant.
That's a great point. The text really does vacillate between caution. I can't say that this is a permanent shift, and these triumphant declarations like science seems to be shifting.
It's an emotional roller coaster. And that powerful insight you noted earlier, that the shift is switched on and switched off on a lever that gets buried under the politics in the promo.
So what if we just leaned into that fragility, the idea that this is a temporary window of opportunity?
That is the suggestion. End the analysis section before the promo with a synthesis that embraces the fragility of the moment. We need to define the actionable takeaway. What should the listener do with this temporary?
That makes sense. Give them a directive, not just a general hope.
Exactly. Let's look at a concrete example. The text says, because it's artificial, it's shallow. Make that the central pillar of the conclusion.
So the message is, the hate was shallow, the water's receding, so now is the time to build?
Yes. Instead of just saying, we can demystify who the Jews are in a general way. Give a specific directive based on the algorithm chain. Now that the bots are down, your educational content actually has a chance to be seen, so post now.
Post now. That's very actionable. It turns the geopolitical analysis into a strategy for the user. It moves them from observer to participant.
It empowers the listener. The headwinds are gone, so start running. That's a much more motivating ending than just, things might be better, we'll see.
I also wonder about the calling out the bad actors part. The text conflates calling out bots with calling out domestic enablers like Tucker and Vance.
That needs to be clear. Is the listener supposed to be replying to Chinese bots or criticizing J.D. Vance?
You'd assume the latter. Replying to bots is usually pointless.
Right, but the text isn't clear, so the suggestion is to refine this. State it explicitly. Don't waste time arguing with the bots. They're leaving anyway. Focus your energy on the domestic figure who are still pandering to a fake reality.
That's sharp and focused. It tells the audience exactly where to aim their fire. It prevents burnout.
And it ties back to the artificiality theme. You're exposing those figures for falling for a con. You're not just disagreeing with them politically, you're pointing out that they're being played.
It really seems like the strength of this piece is that mechanical view of hate. It's not just a social phenomenon. It's an engineered product.
I think you've hit it. If the author just leans into that hate as an engineered product, the entire script tightens up. The vibes become evidence of the machine's stopping. The domestic politics become evidence of the machine's residual impact. And Qatar becomes the new machine we need to dismantle.
And the listener walks away not just feeling better or scared, but equipped. They know how the machine works.
So, to recap the main action item. First, strengthen the evidence for the vibe shift beyond anecdote. Use the mechanics of the bot withdrawal. Show the why.
Okay.
Second, integrate the domestic politics strictly through the lens of foreign influence. Make Trump and Vance case study. Don't let it drift.
Got it.
Third, weave the Qatar threat in earlier to smooth that tonal shift and create tension. Make Qatar the remaining villain, not a surprise guest. And finally, clarify the call to action. Tell the audience to post now while the artificial headwinds are down.
I really love this premise that online hate is a faucet that foreign governments can just turn on and off. It's terrifying, but it's also empowering. If it's a faucet, we just need to find the handle. I'd encourage the listener to really dig into that mechanical aspect in the rewrite.
It's a powerful angle. We would love to see how this script evolves with those changes. Please do submit the revised work back to us for another look. Until then, keep refining.